I'm Miriam Joy, and welcome to my studio. I am so excited to introduce you to my latest class. This is called Dancing Feathers, and I am really excited. I haven't been this excited about a new technique or a new gourd in a long time. So this is a lot of fun. We're going to be teaching you so many techniques in this video. I'm going to show you how I did my feathers as well as the leather or suede feathers. We're going to show you how to carve around it, and then we're also going to show you how to do the double loop lacing as well. So there's so much in this. This is a lot of fun. As always, if you ever have any questions, you can email me at art@miriamjoy.com if you have any questions about anything as we're working along. But I really think you're going to love this technique and have fun with this gourd as much as I do. So let's get started with our supply list. Okay, let's start with our supply list for our dancing feathers. And of course, we always want to start with whatever type of gourd that you want to work with. And we're going to be using a Dremel. A Dremel is so much easier than a drill. A very good mask with an N95 rating or more. A water container. I'm going to be using Mod Podge for the inside of the gourd. We're going to be using a 1/8 brad point, and we do have a new series in stock, and these help you get your exact holes so it don't bounce around on you. So that's a nice thing that we do have, so I wanted to point that out. Just a regular pencil, our white chalk pencil, just some craft scissors. I am using snips in this, a lighter. I have a couple brushes that are optional here. I have an angle brush or a straight brush, 1/2 inch, and just a liner. Just a regular craft old brush to put on the Mod Podge with. Real important item is a bead reamer and all. We do carry those if you need one of those as well. And I also am using pliers. We are also using some tweezers. I'm using a tapestry needle size 18 as well as a leather needle or something similar to that, suede. I am also using one of my 1/2 inch. The smaller flexies, you also could use a regular flexi if needed around the rim. I am not using E6000 in this. I am using tacky glue in this. And to dye our gourd, we have our gloves and our cotton rounds. I have a compass, and on this one I used a flat gourd piece to work with you the first time on. So I really recommend a gourd piece that's flat that you can practice your first one on. Some other ones that we're going to be drilling with are our carving bits. This is a round. I have a 5/16 and a 3/16, and then I also have a small 332 drill bit, and I'm going to talk to you about different sizes depending on what you're using when we get into that a little bit. Our art eraser, or if you want to use your Mr. Clean magic eraser, our sea sponge, a craft sponge, and whatever type of brown that you want to dye your gourd with, whether it's leather dye or alcohol inks. You could even use acrylic paints, that's up to you, but a medium to a dark brown. I also used a dark burnt umber or dark brown acrylic paint. Any brand of acrylic paint is fine, and the same with the metallics, any brand of copper and gold acrylic paints. A paper plate or just a craft plate to put your paint onto, and then I have a little water container, but mostly to hold my Mod Podge in, just a little container. Your basics, your paper towel, brown craft paper or packing paper or brown bags. whatever type of varnish you want to use, and that also depends on what you stain your gourd with. I used a multi-surface white paint. That is an optional item. And then we have our wax cords. This is 6-ply, and I purchased this from Blue Well. And whatever colors you want to make your feathers. We have lacing, depending on whether you want suede or leather lacing. We use, depending on how big your gourd piece is, whether you need few of those or not. And then we have either leather or suede to make your feathers out of. And that is about all of our basic supplies. There'll probably be a few that I'll add as we're going, but I try to remember as best I can so you have an idea of everything we're using. We're going to do your first feather on a gourd shard, and I picked one that wasn't too curvy. You could do it a little bit bigger if you wanted to. I think this was 5.5 by 4. Just a smaller one, but you can make your feathers as big as you want. The one thing I would tell you is you want to make sure that you have a gourd opening that is probably at least 6 inches, because when you're tying, you've got to get both hands in here to tie. And this may seem like a big gourd, but when I was tying, it was very hard. So you want to think about something that's very easy to get in. So nothing when you're working on your gourd with 6 inches. You clean it, have it ready to go. On this one, I've left my inside still, and we'll talk about how to finish this off and make it look really nice. But I did a black spray paint, just a 98-cent one from Walmart, and then I also varnished it with a coat of varnish. If you wanted to leave it natural, then maybe just do a coat of varnish, because it helps this stick, because we're going to be dealing and messing this a lot. And the one thing I would recommend, if you have a blower, a air compressor, that you'll use it a lot to blow it off. If not, go buy a bottle of canned air. Another thing I have done is I have gone to the thrift stores and I have bought a pump to blow up the air mattresses, and that works really well as well. But you want something that's going to blow really hard, because we're going to be using having a lot of gourd pieces everywhere floating around. So that's another thing I want to talk to you about. Make sure you're using a N95 rated mask. I'll grab mine and show it to you here. This is the mask that I use when I'm dealing with this, and this is when I'm cutting, when I'm sanding, anything where gourd pieces are flying off, and especially this one, you're going to have a lot of it. So it's really important to have a really good mask. While the little ones may be comfortable and you think that you're okay with that, it is nothing to mess around with. You do have all of your molds and everything in there, so get a good mask. Be wearing that. Another thing I do as I'm working is, when I'm doing that, I take cotton balls and put it in my ears. I have probably a little bit more sensitive to that, but I get really bad earaches when I am working on gourd and there's dust flying around, so I put cotton balls in my ears, and that keeps me from having earaches. So if you've ever had earaches, that may be the reason. So we're going to practice drawing shapes here first, and we're going to talk about different types of feathers. Say I have a long one here. Like this one, the body of it is about 5.5 inches, and with the stem of it's about 6.5. This one's a little bit shorter. This one's about 6 total. When you're doing it, make sure, like this part got pretty low here, and you're not seeing too much of it. So you always want to start it a little bit higher. So that's kind of important. So we're going to start by kind of designing our own feathers here, and I'm going to kind of give you an idea. This is our thicker, 1 foot inch flexi ruler, 12 inch, excuse me. So this is the middle of our feather. And you can draw this all out with your ruler, but think about this part being your stem, And you're going to take this at a little bit of an angle here, on both sides. And if you need to draw that with your ruler, you can. And there's a couple of ways we can do it. We can kind of arc this and bring that up around and do the other side to match. There are a bunch of patterns on free pattern, feather patterns. Just type it up on Pinterest, free feather patterns, and a bunch will pop. But we've got to think about, this is how your thread goes. And we'll talk about our thread in a little bit here. So you've really got to think about this first part here. If you really wanted to do it more, you had to think about how it would go like that instead. So there are things to think about now, because I want, and this is just our art eraser, I want them to be this point right here. So I want it at this straight at the beginning right there. Now you can arc that up, or we can do it straight. And I'll show you both feathers here. This one is a little bit more arced, and both sides do not have to be perfect. And this was my first one I did. And you can see it's a little bit looser as well. But then we're also going to show you how to have movement in the feather and separate those as well. And this one is really, really straight. So whatever look you like. Now we'll do the same thing again. Leave that stem part first. And so we'd have that there, and then you would simply just take that to the end from each point. So whatever type of feather or style you think you like. And there are also feathers that are more curved at the end, and what I mean by that is they'll have the tip that's more rounded instead of pointed, and you could do that as well, especially if you're kind of doing maybe like an eagle feather. And you could do that. Now we're going to stop and divide it off on areas, but we're not going to do that on our design because it changes as we go. And we're only going to be working a couple stitches at a time. So that's kind of how we do our basic flower or feather. So I'm going to get ready to color our gourd and show you how to do that, and practice your feathers on your piece that's ready. And on this one, I did 3 feathers because you want to kind of usually keep it odd, and then I put the leather feathers on this part, dividing them here, and I'll show you how to do those later on in our video as well. So if you're placing them, you want quite a bit of space in between them. You've got to leave enough space that you can Dremel holes in those as well, and whatever works really good for you. But I wouldn't put them too close together that you lose that spacing. So practice your feather, and we'll come back and start to color our gourd. On this gourd, you can use any type of medium brown or light brown, or even a light yellow if you wanted. But you want to have the gourd kind of set off. So you don't want to go too light or too dark really, because you want to show the darker browns and the lighter of the feather. So any English tan, I love English tan, that's a leather dye. But if you don't want the leather dyes, then any of your ink dyes or your alcohol inks. So I'm going to be using a golden brown. Another one that I would use over here is maybe a caramel. And just going to apply it to our gourd. And remember, the color of your gourd changes the color that you're putting on to it. So if you want that more red, you could even do a red, would be really pretty too. Medium red, not a bright red. Okay, so depending on what you're using, because I'm using alcohol inks, I'm going to heat set it. And that I'm going to do with my embossing gun. Okay, so get that done, and then we're going to put a couple of colors over the top of that. To sponge, I'm going to be using a natural sea sponge, and there's some that are kind of ferny, and there's some, this looks more like coral to me, and I'm going to use the coral looking one. But when you're doing sponging, the biggest thing is to make sure you dip it in your water and you squeeze this out till there is no more water in it, especially because we're going back over something that has not been set, and we can pick up that color. So it's real important to get this as nice and dry as we can. We're going to be using our Folk Art metallic copper. You can use any brand, it doesn't matter. This is just copper metallic paint. I picked mine up at Walmart. We just need a little bit here. We don't need very much because I'm only doing this small piece. You might need a little bit more if you're doing your whole gourd though. And instead of dipping it right in there, most people just go for it, and that's a mistake. Then you get a glob of paint. Pull that paint out and pounce into it, and you will see that you get your design. Now see how even that design is? You don't want to do that either. You want to put it on in move your sponge around. You also could use pigment powder. You apply that on if you wanted to, instead of kind of doing this step to give it some sparkle or shine. And you don't have to apply it everywhere. I just got a nice even coat. See how nice and even that is, and you can see the sparkle when it starts to hit the light. So we're going to let this dry. You could also use your embossing gun on that, or heat tool, and then we're going to put the gold on. I'm doing the gold first, and I put my darker color on the bottom. I've rinsed out my sponge really, really well and squeezed all the water out of it. But you want to do the lighter color on top, the darker color on the bottom. And again, make sure your sponge is not leaving water. If it's dripping water, we'll kind of show you that here in a second. I'll show you why it's important that you don't want that. And sometimes with the gold, you got to kind of look and see where it's shimmering. But if you have water, it's going to pick up your underneath color, and it's going to start to bleed. So it's real important that we have that nice and dry, and we don't have that happen. So go ahead and get your gold all over your gourd or your piece that you're working on. And we're going to start from there. Once you've finished all of your color on your piece, whether it's your gourd or your piece, we're going to go ahead and varnish it. This is going to protect it while we work on top of it, because once you get the wax linen over the top, you really can't go back and varnish it very well unless you brushed it on. Now this was an alcohol, so we got to make sure that we spray varnish. Leather, dye, any of those, you want to make sure that you spray varnish. For this, I would use a satin or a matte. That's up to you. I'm going to use a satin, which gives it a little bit of shine. What brand, if you prefer, I always tell people use what you're comfortable working with. So I'm going to use a Krylon. This is an ultra coverage, and I'm going to do at least probably 2 to 3 coats. And I'm also going to do the inside like we talked about. If you wanted to do the black first, you can. If you want to leave it natural, you can. And I'm going to cover it up with paper later on, but I'm still going to go ahead and coat it now. Use your mask again when you're varnishing. I'm going to take it out, do a couple of actually dry coats where you can't see how wet it is, and then put a couple of wetter coats on that once it's covered. I am using the 12-inch, half-inch flexi ruler, and this is really nice when you're working and putting on smaller things like this on your gourd, so you're not fighting the yardstick. And so I'm going to put my pattern back on again, and I want to leave enough room that I can drill around it as well as put on the holes on the side. And I'm kind of going end to end just so I can have more room here, as well as leave this tail and make that a little bit longer there. Oh, we got to still put the other stuff in it. So I'm going to bring that out a little bit. And the same with that one. And on this one, I want to curve it just a little bit. And if you need to fold a piece of paper in half and cut that shape to match it exactly, go ahead and do that. But we were talking about the free patterns like on Pinterest. Be really careful with those, because you can get real complicated patterns, and the simpler the better for this. I really think you want to keep them pretty simple. So don't overdo your pattern when you're getting it on the internet. Now, I'm a little bit close to this. I've still got to put my edging around. If you were doing the gourd, it would be up here, so you'd want to make sure that you leave room for that. So I am going to look at maybe moving this over just a tad so I have room for that. Keep remembering to grab a paper towel, and I haven't yet. So I'm going to move this up just a little bit here. It's funny how things magically appear. And the wider you want it, that's kind of a personal thing. Just don't do it too wide, or you will kind of lose a tightness of your each feather strand. So think about that as well. So we've kind of got that on there. So I am putting that back on. I'm happy with that. And I'm going to stop, let you get your patterns on. If you're doing them on your gourd, like I had one running this way, I had one running sideways, and then I had one going the opposite direction. So they were all different directions. So they weren't all exactly the same way. So think about that when you're putting them on to your gourd. So get that on, and we'll come right back. So what we're going to do right now is I'm going to take this center line out, and we're going to paint the inside with a dark brown acrylic. And what we're doing is we're adding the shadow to our feather. And burnt umber, dark brown, any of those, any brand of acrylic paint is fine, whatever you want. I'm going to put a little bit of water in my brush, and this is not going to be a solid coat. We're just going to kind of make it a one coat in just a shadow, so it doesn't have to be perfect. It's just getting it on. You could put it on with any type of flat brush. I'm using an angle brush. It's just my personal preference, and I'm putting it on the inside of that white line, so that white line doesn't stay there. And then I'm just going to simply wipe it off once this dries. And So we've got that outside, and we're just going to come in with that inside and just darken that up. So anything underneath this is going to look like a shadow. This will also help when you drill the little holes out. It'll help that show up even that much better. But it really brings the feather forward, helps bring it forward, and sets that off when you have that shadow behind it. If you didn't want to drill around it, we'll talk about that. There you can instead float color around it. And what you do, and I'm using a 1/2 inch angle shader, but you could use a 1/2 inch shading brush. It doesn't need to be in angle. And you dip it in the paint probably about halfway through, and then just walk that back and forth. I've got it a little bit too wet. You shouldn't see the water on the sides. This is an older brush. And blend that out till the color is going from solid to nothing. And you could walk that around the outside of that, and that would bring it forward if you did not want to do the drilling with the holes. So that's another option. You'd come all the way around on both sides of that guy there, and all the way completely around your feather. So whichever way you decide to do that, go ahead and get that done and let your paint start to dry. For this project, I used wax cord and I used 6 plies. I purchased mine at Blue Whale Arts, and the reason I went with this is bigger cord, and I like working with the bigger cord. It's kind of also what you might also refer to as kind of almost a wax linen. But because she sells it so much cheaper than where I can get it otherwise, and like I said, this is a lot thicker. There are some different kinds out there. This is I believe this is a 4-ply. This may be even a 2-ply. I can't read it. But you'd have to do a lot more of these, and you'd have to adjust your drill holes accordingly. So I'll kind of... You could, but you'd have to learn to, there'd be a bunch of smaller holes, and it might not hold as well. So that's the reason I didn't do that, but by all means, feel that you can try it. And if you want that tighter and a lot more of those little feathers in between, then go for that. But on my big gourd here, I used the brown, and I use natural instead of white. I'm going to use white this time. And I used a different color kind of for each feather at the tip. I used red, turquoise, and yellow. And we'll talk about the colors. I think on this one, I really want to do it white and black, just kind of to show you the colors and the basic pattern, but I will talk about changing out different colors as well. So I'm going to, because I'm using the black, I'm also going to use the black for my stem as well. And we're going to remove this outside white here just a little bit. If you have a little bit left, you're going to be drilling on top of it anyway, so it's not that big of a deal. When you're working with your charcoal pencils and you can't get them to write on your gourd, use a lighter or a stove and just heat those up. I keep a Bic lighter in my craft supplies, but I want to talk to you a little bit here about what the lines in between the feathers. So I don't do them solid colors because I think you would lose the lines in there. I have the darker color, whatever color I'm using for my stem, I'm also using as kind of my accent colors, and it helps bring those individual ones to life. So I did 5 here and then a brown, 5 here and a brown, and 5 and then 4 and then 4 and then 3, not counting the colors. And as I was working up, I got smaller. So I went from large 5 in between to 3 up at the top. So that's kind of how I did that. So I'm not going to be exact, but I want to think about, so maybe having like 5, 5, 4, and then start getting into your 3s. But that'll be working as we go. But just to kind of give you an idea for you to stop and think about that instead of continuing to work with the one color. So we're going to do the stem first. We're going to measure out for the stem. It's going to be the width of the feather plus enough to work with if you were working inside of your gourd, 4 or 5 more inches. So I am going to do this a little bit different. For the cording I'm using today, this is a 332 drill bit, and I've kind of tucked it back into the drill a little bit so it's not sticking out as far as normal. And I am going to start my hole with my bead reamer or awl. So I'm poking in the last part and the top part with my bead reamer to create the hole. And the reason I am doing that is so that it doesn't bounce around. I have already got that hole established, so when I start that's just going to go right there in that hole. If you're comfortable without doing it without it, then go ahead. So we're just going to put a hole in there. Remember to put your mask on. So we've got that. I'm going to turn it on and just push it through that hole. And we are done. And so we've got that just big enough that we're getting one cording through. And for this project, I am not using a needle. The reason is it keeps the holes smaller, because if I was going to use a needle, I have to get this width times 2 plus a needle through that hole. So the holes would be a lot bigger, but because we're using the wax cording or type of wax linen, we've got the wax that keeps it stiff enough. So I've put that through the back part. I'm simply just going to tie 1 knot on that. And that's enough to hold it there. It's big enough that it's not going to go through. Now, I'm not going to put it into that second hole yet, but what I'm going to do is come up here, and we're going to punch another hole. This is actually going to be covered up, and this will be for our white now. So we're going to drill that hole. And let's get quite a bit of white here. It's going to depend on how big your feather is. And I'd rather have too much than not enough. And we're going to do the same thing here. So we're going to push this through and tie it. And pull that up to the top. Now, we're going to be just looping this around our black cord, but we need this first one to be right there on really nice and tight. And if it's not tight, do it again. And then we're just going to start looping this up now. I'm going to pull that out for right now, but that first one, it kind of helps hold it down, because if you hold this out, you're not going to be right against that. And make sure you're wrapping your white cord around your black, not vice versa. The reason we're doing this is this helps it look better, but it also helps the next cord stay in place better when you go to put it on. Instead of slipping around, it kind of helps anchor it. Now we're going to run this up about halfway through this feather. Now, if you were doing a big feather and you started to get bigger than about 6 inches, you may want to anchor it twice in 2 places instead of 1. We're going to anchor it in the middle. And the reason we're doing that is because it slides around when you're working on it, and then your middle part of your feather starts to become to one side or the other. So if we anchor it, that doesn't happen. It's also going to happen if you're working on a very curvy gourd. You may need to put some more anchors on it as well if you are working on the curved part of it, because it may want to go on one side or the other. So those are some things to think about, and we're already at the middle. So what we're going to do here is, again, I kind of either put that back in the hole or just lay it above the hole, and we're going to figure out where we're going to anchor that. And what I'm going to do is right where this ends, because we're going to stick that first cord into it, but then we're going to bring it back up behind it. So we're going to have 2 holes pretty close to each other. I'll show you here as soon as I drill them so that you can see them a little bit better. So I've got 2 holes right there side by side. So now we're going to take our white and we're going to put it through that hole. And this is a step that I hadn't shown you yet, because if you're putting it through more than one time, it starts to fray off a little bit. It doesn't take much, just enough to kind of melt that wax. And as you're working, you can cut it down and do it again, but you don't want that thick. You don't want to squeeze it like that. You want to turn it so that it all stays together. If you can't get it through your hole again, then you've got it too thick. So we've got that. We're going to pull it through the side. So we've anchored it in the middle, and you want that nice and tight. You don't want this to bulge up. It's going to get looser as you work it because it is wax, and it kind of loosens up, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. Now I'm pushing this back up from the back, and I do have a pair of tweezers I will be working with every once in a while to just kind of do that. Now, when you're pulling up that second one, pull this first one really tight and kind of hold your finger there till that second one gets up to there, and that will tighten that out. So we've got that anchored. We're going to go ahead and just keep going, and if you do that right, you should not even be able to tell that you actually tied or anchored that off there. Again, don't wrap the black around. Make sure it's the white around the black. And we're just going to do this all the way to the top of this feather. So I've twisted this all the way. Make sure it doesn't go over. Because this hole is bigger and I'm going to put 2 pieces, we've got to make it just a little bit bigger. I'm just going to use my bead reamer awl to make it bigger instead of getting a different size bit. And I'm just going to trim this so they're both going through at the same time. And get both of those going through. And pull those from the top. nice and tight. You shouldn't see that black up there if you did that right. So we've got that. And we're going to cover that little guy up, so don't worry about him. And we're going to tie these off. Now, remember, if you were working inside your gourd, how much harder this would be to do. So that's why you want the bigger opening in your gourd. It's kind of important. Now, we're just going to start on each side doing the same things that we've been kind of doing. Another thing you could do instead of maybe doing the individual holes, if you wanted to wood burn this line, it would grab the bit easier. So that's another option for you to think about as well. So I'm going to put a hole where this comes up and a hole where this one comes up. So these will be a straight line. Okay, and I'm going to do another thing of white. And just do whatever length you're comfortable working with. That's up to you what you're comfortable working with. So you can start on either side. It doesn't matter. We're going to tie it off the same way again. Whatever you're comfortable with. Now on this one, we're going to go ahead and do the end right away because we know that we're going to be using this one quite a bit. We're going to heat it up. It doesn't take much at all. And just get that wax all kind of mushed together so it stays together. Don't overdo it or you get rid of your wax. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to go under this vein. So always go under. You never want to be on top. You always want to go under that vein. And we're going to loop around it. And we want this one pretty good, pulled as nice and tight as we can, back up against this hole where we started our vein. And we're going to go back under this, so you're going to have a loop now, and you will be going back under in the opposite direction. So I'm going to pull that real tight right there, and then I'm going to hold it and pull that loop tight, and then it's going to go back under that vein. Now this one is going to be just a tad higher than the other one because we're actually a little bit up, and that's okay. You also can use, oh dear, I got a cut in my, never had that happen to me as long as I've been working on it. A cut in my white, so that's okay. That was weird. We'll just turn it into a smaller piece and keep on going. And I'll show you how to tie it off sooner than later. Okay. So let's get that going down. And if you need to use your tweezers to help pull that out, you can. Also, you can use your tweezers to push this one loop that we did down further. There's nothing wrong with that. So what we're going to do now is we're going to put a hole pretty close, but remember we've got to drill it, and we don't want it to break into the next one. So when you're working with your gourd piece needs to be wide enough that it won't split, but not so thick that this is hard to do. That's something to think about when you're selecting a gourd piece. So we've got both of those, and so I'm just going to follow that brown line all the way down. When I am drilling, I am keeping my cord out of the way. And it should be far enough away that you're not hitting your drill bit on that cord. So now we're going to simply come up this one next to it, and there is a trick to getting this tight.
So come up next to it, but before we get this all the way up here, pull this nice and tight and hold it on top with your thumb and then pull that. And that one gets this one tight. It doesn't have to be super tight, it just needs to be a nice fit, nice and content, or kind of tight, but not too loose. Now I'm pulling this up against this feather here, a vein or whatever you want to call that. I'm going to call this our vein. I'll call our little ones our featherlets or something. I looked it up online and they've got all kinds of different names. So I'm going to hold that tight there, pull that again. We went under. We went under there, and here we're going to come out here. Now you're going to notice this one's a little bit wider because these two were side by side. There's nothing wrong with that. You can push this down a little bit if you want to get it a little bit closer, but there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. So we're going to push this guy down again. And we're going to stop, get our next one ready. But this moves continuously because of the wax. I tried pre-drilling and it just moved too much. And I did different things with my feathers, and you'll see even more so when we start to separate our featherlets from each other. So I'm going to drill the next set of holes. Now this little feather is going fatter as we're working our way up. So again, we have this here. We're going up this hole here. And if you can't see your gourd or the hole from inside the gourd, what I've done before is I'm looking inside and I can't figure out where it is. Take your awl or your bead reamer and stick it through, and that helps you to be able to locate that. So we're gonna again stick it up that side, but before we pull that all the way, pull that tight, stick your thumb up there, hold it in place, and pull that nice and tight. Again, we're going to go under the vein, pull that nice and tight, hold that middle with your thumb down towards that bottom as much as possible, and underneath that vein. So we looped it, so you should always start under and loop and under, never on top. So now we're coming over to this little vein here, and you can see you have the 2 and the 2 there. Now it's by scooting that down, see how I kind of filled that in? So you can do that, or you can leave it, because we're going to put the holes in between it anyway, carve in our holes. So I think we still have enough to go across one more here. So we're going to do a hole there and a hole there. Now if you were doing smaller cording or wax linen that was smaller ply, you're going to have to get your holes closer together. Again, move your wax linen out of place. And just punch your holes. And come up through that hole. Okay, again, pull that nice and tight from the back. Hold it with your finger. Pull that through. Don't pull it so tight that you break that piece. It should just be firm. Again, under the vein. Loop it. And back under. Hold that on the center of the vein nice and tight, and loop it, and then put it in the one across. So this is not really going to probably, you'd rather have a longer piece to tie off to than a shorter piece. So I am going to tie off, and I am simply just going to put a knot in the one that I'm going to connect, and I'm going to leave a longer tail this time because I'm going to tie this piece to this piece. So we're just going to simply start our next one. And I've got, this will be my 5th one, so I'm going to think about putting in my vein color. So we've got our knot in that end, and I had already burned off this end, that's right, because he just fell apart. And I am on this side. See, I can't see that guy because he's got goobers covering them up, so if you stick him through from the front, you can see him. Okay, so there he goes. All right, now I am going to loop him first before I tie him to the other one so that he does not get loose. So again, under, nice and tight. See how we've got those as nice and neat as you can get them. Mine aren't perfect. They're not perfect. And you can already see the middle vein has so much more loose play to it than when we first started it. Keeping those tighter keeps them nice and even on there. So this guy's fraying up a little bit, so that's okay. Just gonna cut him down just a little bit. Don't do too much, just a tiny bit. You don't want to lose your length as much as possible. There, that's a good one. Okay, and into our next one. Okay, so we have 4. I want to do the next one black, the color of the vein. Now, remember I talked about if you want those closer together, scoot those down. So I'm going to do a black one, and we're going to keep going the same thing, just like you were before. Only thing that's going to change is our color. Okay, so we're going to tie this guy off. We're not tying him to anything. We don't need to. We don't need to tie an end or anything. And you actually can pick either side that you want to start him on. There is no right or wrong on the sides. So you decide that. Forgot to heat him up here. You can see how little heat that takes. The wax is so thin on it that you just need a little bit of heat. And I also wanted to use a piece so you can kind of see what the back is looking like and what your strings are looking like. So if you're doing this, you're all on one side here and one side here. So that's our workable one. And this guy right now, we've tied him off. We're not going to do a new one. So to keep him out of the way, we can come and cut him. I leave him about a 1/2 inch or an inch or 3/4, kind of about like that, so that that is out of the way. I'm going to leave these guys up here though, because we'll probably end up tying on to those. So again, under, always under. And then we loop and pulling that nice and tight up against this guy here, loop. And you can see how that wiggles to the side. If we hadn't anchored it, how that could really be moving on you, okay? So that is why we anchor. And I am going to move this down. Okay. Probably a little bit long for the black here, but that's okay. So we've got that tight over there. I'm going to keep it tight over here. So then we're just going to kind of set him aside again for right now, because we're not going to use him again for at least another 5 or 4 more holes. But what I want to do now is start to add some room between the feathers. And so on this side, I want to bring it up to here this time and leave that much space. So I'm going to poke a hole there. And then this one's going to be just normal on the other side. And make sure your strings are out of the way. And do it like normal. So I've got my white on this side. So again, make sure that guy's nice and tight. And pull him up here. So I'm going to make sure he's tight there, hold him there, and you're just going to go around that black one. It'll go to one side or the other once it's tied. Oop, there it goes. All right, so now we're going to go under, loop, under. Under, pull it down, nice and tight on that. Loop, under. And now we're going to go real high up to this guy. And if you always wanted to see what it looks like, loop it before you do drill the hole. And I wouldn't go any farther apart than that. I would do just that. Now, if you're getting comfortable with this, you maybe could do 2 holes on each side, but I wouldn't do more than that because it changes as you're going. So we're going to do one there and one there. And if you break through, we'll talk about, I'll have one actually break through so I can show you kind of how to fix it. Make sure your cording is out of the way. So we're going to pull this nice and tight, hold that up on top, and stick it through. Okay, now see, this guy is moved a little bit. Don't forget to pull that black a little bit tighter because he's not secure yet. So we're going to help put this underneath, and we're going to anchor it and pull it down some more when we do our under and then our loop. You want that up there nice and tight. And pull that down. And nice and tight again there. And I'm going to bring in my tweezers and do that. Now, I wouldn't have your feather, see how we didn't start out at a real sharp angle and we're getting more of an angle? I wouldn't go much more of an angle than that right there, because then you start to pull on your vein. It starts to move up and down and you don't have as much control on it there. So that is my kind of food for thought on there. So let's go ahead, do a couple more here. We're going to pull that, hold that down nice and tight. That's what gives you your tighter little featherlets. And then we'll pull that there. Alright, good. Under, loop, under. Under, loop, under. It's your word for the day. Under, loop, under. Your phrase for the day. Under, loop, under. Never on top. And pull that one tight, hold it with our fingers, pull that down. The more you do, the better you're going to get. Your first one may not look as great, mine didn't, and I had to really stop and see. Don't be afraid to take things out. And the tweezers helped quite a bit once I kind of figured that out as well. So I'm going to catch this guy up over here now with a spot that's open. So what I kind of did was I kind of thought about straight across now because I want to even these out. So I'm going to put it here, and then this other one So actually, this one will be here. So you even could go a little bit higher. Poke that hole and he'd be there. And sometimes this naturally happens as you're working on a feather like this one because the gourd got fatter. So I had to keep kind of doing it here, here, and here instead of one and evening it out. So you may have to even it out just to keep the shape of the gourd. So that's something to think about as you're working. So it's okay. That's a nice way to correct things and just keep them moving. So we're going to do these one up over this and then the one side by side. So we're still working with our white here. So I'm going to pull that tight, hold it with my thumb on the other side, and nice and tight. Okay, so under, over, under. Under. Hold that with your thumb nice and tight. The nice thing is you guys get to learn by all my mistakes, and you don't have to make as many of them as I have when I'm doing a new project. So we have that one there. Now this has been 4 white. I think I'm going to go ahead and do 5 white. I have room for 4. When you're working with a color, on this one I want to be more of a kind of maybe eagle's feather. So I'm just going to, when I get up here, switch my colors and have black on the tip instead of introducing a third color. But you want, this one I'm going to do a little bit more, but when you're doing this, you do a third of the feather approximately, but we're going to talk about how I did those. And you don't go all solid color either, so because it looks kind of funny if you just keep that white all, or that base color all the way out, the vein color, excuse me. So we've got 4, so we need one more. I'm just going to go up on each of those. And if you have one that's out and it gets too far out, then do your next one a little lower. Like if you have one up here, then do your next one a little bit lower. Or if you were doing a really fine wax linen, say 2-ply or 4-ply, you could do that to help the holes a little bit, to help anchor them so the holes didn't break through. So again, we're going to pull this guy. This will be the last time before we tie off with a new piece here. And we're going to go under, over, and this guy is looser right here. So what I do is if I can push this part back through and grab him, I'll tighten him up a bit. And sometimes you have to get your awl out a little bit here and pull him back out and tighten that back out a little bit more. So we've got him tightened again. So hold him there. Make sure you've got him hold of him good, and then tighten that. So over, under, over. Okay. And that loop needs to be by itself. It should not be sitting on top of another loop. And that last one there. Okay, so now we're going to bring in our black. So same thing here. But we've done 5, so we're going to bring in the black again. Make sure your finger's not under there. Alright, so this black is not anchored, so we need to pull it nice and tight. And you are going to come a long ways up that back part now. So we've got it right here. And we're going to go there. Okay. So, under over okay, and I'm going to pull this guy down with my tweezers and get him in there nice and tight. So we've got 5 in between each one of those. We're getting movement in our feather. We're also, by adding the lines, you're giving it texture. So I am going to tie a new white on now. We must have had a cut in our white. Okay, let's hope there is no more of that. There's another one like that. I must have ran my knife or scissors or something up against it. Okay, we should be good. So on this one, I'm going to do the same thing because I need to tie off that another white end. So I'm going to give a little bit of a end that I can tie onto. So we've got our black. We're still working with our black. We don't want to tie it off. We've got our new... I guess we got to put our holes in first. Ha ha ha. Get this white started and I'll show you how to fix one. You can stick it all the way through with the awl. It's just a lot more time consuming. I went ahead and broke this one through, and what I mean by broke through is both this hole and this hole are so close they actually became one. So if you're going along and you go up the next one and it comes through like that, we know how to fix it. So there's a couple of things you could do. If you wanted to spend the time and put a little quick wood behind it or some type of clay, then you could drill through it again and it would be fine. But what I do, instead of coming up here because it's just going to come out again, this is the one time we're going to cross over to the other side. And make sure that you have that one far enough away, and if you need to leave some space between it, leave some space between it. So I'm going to go ahead and drill that side, make sure I have nothing underneath it, including my fingers. So we're going to come across the back and up through that hole. Make sure that's nice and tight. And again, we're going to go under and under, over, under. I'm getting closer to this anchor here, so it's going to be a little bit harder to get underneath those. So if you need to take your bead reamer and get underneath those, do that. So now, because I'm not coming up underneath that, I'm coming across, I can still go in that direct hole just fine. So see, Now we'll start our next one right next to that, and that fixed that for us. And we've kind of got an opening right here, a natural one, so we're just gonna leave that. And I'm gonna start my next hole. And go up through there. And pull it down, make sure it's tight. The last one we did. Hold it on top and pull it. So that's how we fix it when you break through. And that's the only time. Otherwise, if you didn't have that, you would just be completely going up and you wouldn't have a crossover. But that's really simple enough. So I'm going to go ahead and do a couple more here. On this one, I'm going to do 4 before the black. And if I start to get too close and need to show you how to do that, then I'll come back and show you that. But I'm just going to work forward a little bit. On this next one, I'm going to give some space between there to kind of open that one up, and I'm going to leave that one bigger, and that one will move up in just a moment. So this is 4 now, and we're going to do our black. So we're going to pull it tight from where it was and run it up that side. And so here is where it's kind of getting tight here. And you can even use your needle. And I'm using a number 18 tapestry needle because it doesn't have a sharp point. If you need to get under there and you can't quite get under there because our other spot is up a little bit, so we don't want quite there yet. So I'm going to use my needle, getting it back through the second time. Get all your strands through there. Sometimes that's a fun part with the needles, is getting all of that through. That's okay. So this is going to be still on this side of our anchor. Just going to pull that nice and tight. And get that there. And get rid of my needle. I'm just going to trim that part off and do it again. There we go. Perfect. So we're going to come down that one now. So our white one will probably be able to go to that other side on. We'll take a look at it in just a minute here. See if it's close enough to go on the other side of that anchor or not. By now you should kind of be getting the hang of it. Should be going pretty well for you. So I'm going to try and go in on this side of that anchor now and just really bringing that loop down over the top of that other part. Right, especially right there. I can really get up there and kind of anchor that. And you can see this one's already kind of loosened up on us as well. And let's see if that's far enough down. I'm going to bring it down with my tweezers a little bit here. And I probably should have moved the hole with the white one, because that kind of gives it some space in between. So if you think that you need to be closer with it, just do it again with the needle. Try one more time, just tightening that up really tight up there. And if you find things that work better for you, then do them. There is no right or wrong on this. It's just how you interpret it. So I'm going to leave that because we're going to fill that in with holes, and I think that's okay. So I'm going to try and get 3 more white in here before our next black. I thought doing 4 in between this one was too much here because we're transitioning to our other color. So I took that out and went back to black, and I also adjusted on my right to make up for my left. So I've done that, and right here is where we're going to switch our colors. So now I'm going to do 3 black and then 1 white, and if you were doing a 3rd color, we'll talk about that in just a minute. So I am just going to come back in now and do 3 of the black and 1 white. I never go less than the 3 because you want to keep that kind of movement of the feathers, and I feel with 1 solid color it's just too much. But if you wanted the tip all a solid color, you can. That's just totally up to you. Another thing you can do, instead of like doing the colors at the tips like I was doing, you could put the colors where I have the white and then transfer that over to the white at the top instead, so you get these really colorful feathers. So there's just use your imagination, and being able to adjust is what also makes you a really good artist. So don't think just because I say it's a certain way, that's the way it has to be. So just do what you're comfortable with and make it your own. So I've got my 3 in and my white, and I'm going to keep working that way. Now that's gotten loose, but we're going to be able to tighten that up because we left those ends on it, so we'll be able to tighten that up a little bit more as we go. But if you were doing the colored, we would keep our brown being the same basic one all throughout the pattern, and we would start to alternate our white. So on here, let's do one that's got 3. Let's see if we've got a 3 one. This one's a little bit better or easier to understand probably. So on here I have 4 here, but between here we have 3 between the brown, and we're starting that over. So what I would do is I would do 1 white, 1 of my colored, and 1 of my white on the first 3. Then I would do my stem color, or whatever color we want to keep, a constant. And then we would switch off these 2 colors. We would do 1 colored, 1 white, and that's going to be the last of our white, and then the colored, and then our constant color, our stem color, and then you would do 3 in the constant color, 3 all the way to the tip, and just wrapping it around until you got all the way there. And that's how you switch those 2 colors off. If you didn't want to do it that way, you could do it just like I'm doing with the 2 colors and just switch at a certain point. But I think this way it gives it a more natural, gradual color instead of a sharp line, and I like that a lot better. So I may put in another opening of a feather. I'm not quite sure yet. I'm just going to play with it as I go. So I'm going to be doing my 3s, and then my stem color and 3s, and then I'm going to work up to the tip, and then we'll pick it up from there. Okay, I've done all these different sections, and I'm just going to try to end with 3 black ones on each side, and then again I'll pull that back part a little bit tighter there. But you don't want your tip so small, the pattern, that you don't have any room to kind of come in and work it. So this is actually okay, and I even might make this side just a little bit bigger right there and just try and get those 3 black ones in at the very tip there, so I'm going to continue working on that. So I'm going to get the last 2 holes, and I'm going to go ahead and poke both of these. Normally I wouldn't do that, but I want to put them kind of between that and the last one on the end. And then we'll pre-drill all of those. Watch your cording underneath and above. If you need to move it out of the way. Okay, and then we're going to finish up. If you don't happen to end up in the pattern of the 3, that's okay. I didn't on all of mine either. I probably ended up with like the last color or something different, and there's no right or wrong on that. That's just how I am ending it up on this one. And we're going to try and get it in here, and we might have to bring our needle in again. We'll check that out as we're going here. And I was afraid of that. I got too close on that one and blew that one out. So we're going to jump it here, just like we did before. So back down through that hole. So we're not going to go up through the next one. We're going to jump across. So a little bit worried about that guy. So I'm going to pull that one. And this is why we don't want our gourds too thick. It'd be harder to get these up through there. So we've jumped across that one. And I'm going to bring this guy down with my tweezers. All the things on the table that I'm catching into. And when it gets that loose, just twist it and tighten it up like that. And if you notice that something doesn't look right there, make sure you didn't go over, under, over. Instead of under, loop it and under. So if something doesn't look right, check that out. Don't be afraid to take it out. There is nothing wrong with taking things out. That's how we learn. So now I'm going to go back through that hole that I blew out. Hopefully I can get in here. I may have to make it a little bit bigger, so a little bit smaller. It's going to give me some more wiggle room in there. Open that up just a little bit more. And I've got lots of cording here, so I'm not going to worry about it here. There we go. Much better. And I'm trying to pull that tight there. It can get a little bit harder when you're working on that last little part. Keep the strings out of it, and under, over, loop it over, and I've lost my little thing again. We're almost there. Don't give me trouble now. And down through this little hole. And boy, it'd be a little booger now. And now that we know we're near the end, it's trying to give me problems. And you may have to move those knots around to get it in there and everything. Now this guy has turned out to be a little bit too big. Now if we can pull him tight enough, that's great. But I think what we're going to do to this guy is actually untie him and loosen some of those last knots, or excuse me, loops. Take some of those out and then retie it, and it'll be nice and tight. So, and I'm just getting my awl or my bead reamer back in there and just unknotting it. So I'm going to just pull it back through that hole. And see how that turns. So we've got just a couple too many loops there, I believe. And I'm even going to test that. That looks okay. I think I'm even going to take off one more. And I'm going to put that back down through those holes again. We'll take a look at it once we get it there. There, that lay down much nicer. And you could even come up and loop one more black one across right at the top of that if you wanted to. That's up to you. I think I'm just going to leave mine, but that's totally up to you. And then we're going to retie that. And once you decide you're all done with those guys, we're going to, these were the two that we were working with. We're going to tie those guys now too. Just make sure that you have a nice and even and taut on the other side. And I'm going to cut these off about a 1/2 inch. Everything now because I'm all done with it. My shorter strings, I'm going to get rid of. My longer strings, I'm probably going to keep. So that is our feather. We've got some more fun things to show you that really make it pop. I'm going to share with you a secret. How I make the inside of my gourds look so good when I've been beading them. And what we're going to do is we're going to Mod Podge over the top of this and just cover up all the strings, make it look nice and neat and all tucked away. Especially if you want to enter it into competition, it's real important to have it look as good as possible. So I'm going to be using just plain old Mod Podge. Now there's matte and there's satin and there's gloss. So you're going to kind of decide which one you want. And you never shake it. You always roll it, and that way you don't get the bubbles, and that's really, really important. So I'm going to just pour some in here. And you want to do this before you drill the holes for the rim.
So we want to do that before we drill these holes, because they'll go right through it and then it'll all be done, and you won't have to worry about getting that up around there or making that look nice or anything like that. And I use packing paper, and it also could be called your brown bags, like your grocery bags. And I use water to tear it apart and just pull it. But I want to keep some of these edges straight, because we want these on the side, or if you were doing them up under the rim, you'd still have this part right here that you'd want some straight ones. So I try not to cut my paper when I am using it. I just take my finger and do it like that, and that way you don't have all of those rims. And then I just take them and wet it down and pull those off in pieces. Now, doing the inside of a gourd, you could do a little bit bigger pieces. That's totally up to you, but I need some corner edges, some straight pieces. You also could cut the straight pieces and then just do the other part, but this makes it really easy to pull apart. So this is kind of how I have done it. Now, I also, when it's thicker like this, you don't have to, but I prefer to put mine in the water and get them wet and then apply them. They go on smoother that way. So I'm going to start with just a plain old craft brush, nothing fancy, and we're going to put the first layer on. And I usually work in a section of a gourd just about this big, in fact, not try to do the whole gourd at one time. And so I'm going to start with that guy there. Now I actually need a corner pieces on this one, so we may have to cut some corner pieces here for these. So I need those on 3 sides to be straight. Have to stop and think about it here for a minute. So actually the 2 sides, I'm getting a little bit goofy here. So like that part there, and then this one would be kind of unruffly, or however you want to do it. It doesn't matter if they're straight. If you like to do it that way better, then do it that way. So I'm going to wet this guy down, and then while he's wet, I'm going to put some Mod Podge on him, and we're going to put him on the way we want him to go on. Now for this piece, just a little bit drier. Then you can bring your brush over the top of that and help put that down, but have your Mod Podge back into it. So you're going to do a coat of Mod Podge, your paper, and then your Mod Podge. Now on these guys, I just try to get them to lay down as flat as I can. Make sure there's none hanging out the sides, and just work with them the best way that we can. So I'm going to get that edge there, and I'm going to wet him a little bit. He just lays better if he is wet than if he is dry. And put a thing of Mod Podge on him and lay him on my gourd piece. And then you'll start to see, just kind of push down. You don't want any air bubbles, and you could even poke a hole in there if you needed to, if it was standing up too much. But you're going to see how much better that looks than seeing the strings just laying there. Now we have that one thicker batch right there, but the rest of it isn't going to be as thick. And I'm going to get these 4 corners done, and then we'll start to fill in the rest of it. Another really nice thing is you can color this after it's dry with any type of acrylic paint you want. You could sponge it. There's just multiple things that you can do with that. You don't have to get stuck
with just this color. And I pick mine up at the Dollar Tree, the 99-cent stores. If you don't see it in the wrapping section, go back and look in the packing section, because they'll be there. But also it comes with different kinds of designs as well. I've got some with white flowers on it. I've also got some with dog prints on it. So there's all kinds of different kinds as well as just a straight brown wrapping paper. So I've also taken my paper, painted it with acrylic paint because it's not going to run, and then pulled it apart and applied it. So you can do that way as well. Whatever you think would work the best for you, then do it that way. So I've got to get this guy a little bit straighter here. But then after this, as you're working, they're going to get dry. Just kind of put another coat over the top of it. But if you're doing a gourd, you'll be dry enough that you can go back and do that. It's not going to take that long to dry if you're working on a gourd itself. So we're covering those up. So now I want to come back in some of these along the side. Actually, I'll just come back and put another piece on the top of that one. That's okay, I've got a skinny piece. I'll just lay it right there. And if it's not quite hearing as much as you want to, let it dry a little bit and push it down a little bit more with your brush as you're going. But see, it's so much better already than when we just had all of our tails out. If you wanted to paint this black and paint the sides black of your gourd piece, that is just great. We're going to need one more piece on the side here. We'll take a look. Just make sure it doesn't stick above that. And this little piece will do it on the edges, and all I got to do is fill it in. And it's going to take it just a little bit to dry here, but make sure it's completely dry before you start to drill the holes, because you don't want it to kind of gum up on you and have to try and fill that all in. And I'm just going to have one little spot. Now when you're working in a gourd, I'm going to move that guy to the middle because he's at the edge. You sometimes have to wait for it to dry to see spots that you've missed. Let's see how much better he's going to sit down there than where I originally had him. So, but I can see that guy right now, and I know that I have missed him. But other than that, sometimes you do have to wait and then do one more coat just in case you miss any of them. And then once you get that area You start to go on to the next area, you should be able to just start coating that one more time. Get a nice, keep getting hair in here. Don't want that. A nice even coat across all of it. But doesn't that look so much better than the showing the all of our threads? To drill our holes or carving into the around the feather, we are going to talk about that, but I'm going to go ahead and measure this off because this is a smaller piece, so I don't want to get my carving into the edges as much. So on this one, I'm just going to do a small edging, and I'm just using a compass. And I'm taking the edge of the compass and I'm running it just along the edge to keep my place so I can draw a straight line, and that's where I'm going to put my holes in to make my edging. And I'll show you how to do that on the gourd as well in just a second. I'm doing it smaller on this little piece. But if we were going to do it on the gourd, I think I did it almost 1/4 of an inch out. So what you would do is just have this piece slide along the top of that gourd edge. And it's easier when this is straight down and not flat like that. And just keep that on the very edge. I'm not making it look so pretty because it is not flat on there. Let's try doing it the other way. Let's flip it over the edge. There we go. And just pull it along that way. So that is working much easier. So you would just do that all the way around your gourd, or get you another 1/4 of an inch. Another thing I do is these are 1/2 inch. So you also can trace them around if you want to, and your gourd is not real small like that, but that helps you get that line. And I'm trying to hurry and I need to slow down to make that look good, but I've got this one, so that's what I'm after. And to do this, I'm going to be using my carving bits, and these are round, and there's different sizes, and it kind of depends on you. On my first one, I used my larger one, and I just didn't dip it in as much. But on this one, I think I'm going to use, I think this is about a 5/16 maybe, and my small one is probably a 3/16 or a 1/8. So I want a smaller one and I want a bigger one, because the smaller ones we're going to be able to get in there, and I like that smaller one, and that's probably a 1/8, I would say. So I'm going to put it in, and I also like to tuck it down in quite a bit so it's not sticking out, so I can control it with my hand a lot more. Now on this one, I'm going to keep it kind of away from these areas right here, and you normally wouldn't have that so close to the edge with your gourd. And I'm going to put the bigger ones on the outside, and then we'll come in with the inside. But I want you to think about kind of 3 rows, 1, 2, and 3. So there is no right or wrong. I don't claim to be a carver. That just really helps it stand out more. And if you have a better way of doing it, then do it that way. So just remember, wear your mask, put your cotton balls in your ears. And I am not going to touch those. But the one thing that you have to do is to have a good enough grip, because this will kick out, and you don't want to have that. And you may like doing 1 row at a time or doing a couple rows at a time. And you may like to leave more of the gold shining through. It's all a personal opinion. There is no right or wrong.
You will find that there's softer places of a gourd than others. Now on this one, we want to come up to this back part right here, but don't get on the thread. I use this technique quite a bit if I want something to stand out that needs to be lifted from the background. And we're going to come in with the smaller one and get a little bit closer. So if you don't feel you're getting close enough, that is okay. If you want to put some big ones in there, you can in the wider areas. That's up to you. Or you could just do all small up there. One thing I will say is you don't want it to look uniform or like there's 2 or 3 lines. You want it to look uneven. The more you push down, the bigger that hole will get. Now, I'm going to switch to my smaller one. And I did a bigger area, of course, on the ones I had more room on my gourd. And I left some in between. So that's, again, a personal opinion on what you want to do. That's really up to you. You can see that one's got a lot of more red undertones to it than this one does. So I'm switching out to my small one now, and to keep it straight, start to tighten it and put this in at the last kind of minute so it's nice and straight. And then always make sure it doesn't bounce before you go to your gourd and do it. So I'm going to come in here now and I'm going to start getting a little bit closer, but still, again, we don't want to get on the cording itself. And when you hit those holes, it's really soft. So you want to be careful with that as well, because it can really just really take off on you from there. So I kind of go around the outside of it first. Then I come around the outside and I kind of give some little ones out here and there.
things that I really fight with as an artist is trying to make it too symmetrical. It should not be symmetrical. So that's one thing to think about. So now we're going to come back in and we're going to fill in these areas that we have open. And anywhere where it's loose, like right in these two, I'm going to put some little ones in there. And of course the bigger areas. Now when you're working with these, open up your threads and try to stay away from your thread as much as possible. So this guy's got a little bit. Now he's got some big ones here, so on the bigger ones, make sure it doesn't look like lines. And you can decide like if you want any in there or not. That one looks like a little bit more right there. So I'm going to do it there. It's just a personal opinion on where you think you need to put them. I think this just really gives it that feather feel and the movement of the feathers. So that is up to you. We've got one side down here. But also by making that area darker, those show up better. You may decide that you want some bigger, so don't be afraid to switch to the bigger round carving tip. And you can play with it. You can add more, or you can do whatever you like on that. To put our lacing through, we're going to drill our holes, and I want to introduce you to a new item that I requested from my husband, and we call these brad point drill bits, and they've got the point so they anchor into your wood, or in this case your gourd. And I'm using the 1/8, and it's going to depend on what size of needle and lacing you have. But I'm going to be using suede lacing. Leather lacing is fine too, but this is a leather needle. And I'll show you how to put that together in a little bit. But you've got to make sure that there's a room for that and the lacing to go through. And that would just be, if you were doing this on your gourd, we're going to do it exactly the same. We're going to take our, I'm going to use the flexi here, and I would just be putting a dot right on that line at every 1/4 inch, just right there, and you just turn the flexi as you're pulling that around, because we want these really close together. And for your gourd, you just keep that going all the way around. You wouldn't have to worry about corners. Now on this piece, because I am working with corners, the first thing we're going to do is start with a corner and end with a corner, so that we don't have that any different. And so I am going to mark on my line now every 1/4 inch, just with a tip
of my white charcoal pencil right on that line. And remember, if it's not writing real bright for you, then just go get your lighter and light that tip up just a tad. And these are going to be about 1/4 of an inch. You might have to adjust, and if you're doing it on the gourd as well, you might have to adjust the last couple to make that kind of even out. So you may want to put that like in between, someplace that it wouldn't show as much if it wasn't exactly perfect. So now I'm going to take these brad tips, and the trick to these, I'm going to lay these right on my white charcoal pencil, and I'm going to push that point in, and then I'm going to hit it with my drill bit. Turn it on, and it goes through. So then I'm going to do the same thing right in the middle of that white one, then turn it on. And I don't turn them on until I am securely in that hole. Otherwise, they have a tendency to walk away on you. So that's really important. Just simply, we're going to put that in there and just turn it on. I got a little bit ahead of myself there. And then you have that control of where that hole is going. And that is how you use the brad tip bits. So now you can see these are going through our paper, and honestly I pushed this a little bit, but it's still doing really pretty good. I should have had it a little bit drier, but see how good that looks compared to what we had before. And I'm just going to continue all the way around. Again, on a square piece, I want to make sure that both of my holes are in that square corner, and then we will be done with that. Another thing I would really suggest is getting a old cutting board, and you can pick those up at the thrift store, so when you're going through, you're not going through on your table. I thought I was being careful and lifting that up, but if I'm doing it, chances are you're doing it. So that's another thing. Now at this point in time, we're going to take it out and we're going to blow it off, whether you're using an air compressor, anything like that. You want to blow all of this out really, really well, and you should have everything ready to go, and we'll do our double loop lacing. So after you've drilled the holes, come in here and remove any lines now so it doesn't show up later with your art eraser or clean eraser, and then wipe that dry. A leather needle has these two little points that catch it, so you're not actually threading it, you're kind of setting it in there. And some of them suggest if you have a real wide piece, you may want to cut the end to a point, but I cut the end of my point and I didn't find that it helped anymore, and I actually would lose it. So I'm not going to do that. But what you're going to do is put it on those two little kind of fang things, and then you're going to take your pliers and you're going to push that down so that your leather or your suede is on there. Now, if you have a piece that is one-sided, you want to think about what you want to show up at the top. So I am going to start in the middle of this. If you actually maybe a little bit off to the side, so it wouldn't be quite in the middle. If you were working on a gourd, you'd want to do it a part that wouldn't show. Now, if you had a piece that was one solid piece and you were going to do the whole rim, they tell you it's 7 times, but I would do 8 times. I would rather have too much than not enough. But I'm going to show you how to use lacing pieces and to keep adding on. But the first thing we're going to do is we're going to pull it through from the back. And I'm going to leave a couple inches there, and I'm going to pull that over, and then I'm going to pull this one towards the back, and we're going to go through this hole here again. And what it is making an X, and you want to make sure that it is not turned in any way. And sometimes what I'll do is I'll take this all the way up to my needle so that I know that it is not twisted.
So when it comes back over, we have that X on top. So what we're going to do now is take the needle, loop it over, and come through the middle of that X. And you're going to pull it not too tight, but kind of taut. And this can be done with leather, or I am using suede. So again, we're going to go to the back now and come through this next little hole. And what we're going to do is we're going to set that leather piece up on the edge so that it gets tucked under. So now we have that. So we're going to come underneath this guy again and come forward. And we're going to just keep covering that up. So I'm going to move it to this edge. It would probably be a lot better if I painted that edge black to match my lacing. So that's something to think about. So we're coming up through the lacing, back around, and up underneath there, the one that we just did. I tried to make this harder than it was, so try not to make it harder. It almost looks like a braiding, but you have some X's. So this next time we're going to go in the hole and keep this guy up on top, and then we're going to come back underneath the one that we just did. Keep that kind of nice and taut. And we want to keep that on the very edge. Again, through here. And just under the one, and under the one we're hiding that we just did. So I want to make sure that guy doesn't get out and stick out. So I'm going to keep him tucked in. So now we're going to go back to the next one. Now if you are working on a gourd, you are just going to do this all the way around the gourd. Now if you're working on a piece like this, we'll show you when we get to the corner just one thing that we're going to do different. I've always was intimidated by leather lacing rims, and I don't know why. I think I always try to make them too complicated instead of just complicated enough. But you want to also make sure that you're getting the holes tight enough, or close enough together, I should say, that this turns out well. So, and make sure now in that one I got it twisted. So we want to undo that. And I want these guys just to be a little bit looser on the back than I have them on the front. And then when you're doing it on a gourd, it's going to look wider as well. And if you're doing it with leather, it's going to be thicker than just the suede. This is thinner here. So if you had a wider area to cover up, you may want to use the leather and not the suede. So I'm going to go ahead and keep on working here, and we'll get down to the corner. So the two holes at the corner, the one in the corner and one next, you might need to make those a little bit bigger if you can't get your lacing through it twice. So we're going to do this regular until we get into that one on the corner. And I got that one twisted, so let's get that untwisted. And I'm not pulling these really tight, especially because this is the suede and it's not as thick as the leather. And for some reasons I keep getting that one twisted. Try one more time here. There we go. Okay, so now around and then underneath the one that we just did. Just like we're doing it, only we're going to go in it one more time here. And go underneath it one more time there. So we may need to go back and put a third one in there, but we'll see if we need just two in this one to cover it up. If not, don't be afraid to adjust to that and go back and do that. There is nothing wrong with that. Learning to adjust is a sign of a good artist. So we're going again through this the second time and then up and underneath the one that you just did. Okay. So we're starting to get shorter on our strand here. So what we're going to do is we're going to start our next strand. And what we're going to do is simply lay it down. So when we do this next stitch here, we're going to start picking it up. So we're going to pull that down. And I'm just going to lay it down here again. We're going to catch that this time, and I think I need to go back here and add one more stitch in that corner. So I'm going to do that, and then we'll catch it back up here. I like to leave this in so people know that I have to figure things out as well. So I'm going to move this guy closer to this edge this time because we're putting that third one in. So that's going to start there. And I don't know which side I want him on yet. So I guess on that side. So we'll go here now. And so I've got 3 stitches in that one, and then we're going to have 2 stitches in this one. So through to the front, loop it over and under both of these. We want it the one that we're putting on as well as the one that we just did. So I got to put that guy back in there. Sometimes it can be a little bit slippery. If it was a leather piece that was stiffer, it would probably be easier to hold it there. So just kind of give you an idea on that. And I don't want that to show. So again, loop it over, same hole, and then come back, and we're going under the one that we did plus the one that we're adding right now. So I'm hoping I can get one more in here so I can kind of get this guy secured. So we did 3 in this one and 2 in that one. So we're going to come around. This guy should be laying kind of flat. So again, underneath the one that we did and the one that we're adding. So we're getting him kind of secured now. Okay. So I think I'm going to try one more time. So I'm going to bring that through. So that guy's there. And I'm going to switch places with those two right now. So we've come through the front, and we're going to pick that up right where we left off. Remember, if you were doing this on a rim, you wouldn't have to worry about corners at all. This is just if you were doing a square piece. So, this guy right here is going to now take this one's place. So we did that loop here. So this guy would actually be coming forward. We'd be looping it and coming through there. So he's got to kind of come back just a little bit there. So he's in that area, if that makes sense. He would be up under there. That's where we left off with our last one. So we come up there, loop it forward, get that untwisted. Keep this guy on top. And we're going to be picking up both of those guys till we get this guy ran off now. Underneath him. Make sure he's not twisted. Pull it forward. And that's another reason sometimes it's nicer with the smaller pieces than one long piece. So we're bringing that through our hole, and then we're going through the back underneath just that one and the one that we're covering up now. So you should have a nice even braided piece. So now we're going through the back and then underneath this last loop, but also the one we're covering up. And we're just going to continue working. We're going over. And then now we've got that one all done, so you're just doing the one loop. That's my big bad security dog that hides behind Mama every time he hears anything. And loop through the back. And again, it should just look like it's braiding. And if we were doing leather, it would look a little bit better, I think, than the suede. But you should be getting across each time. So I'm going to do up to the corner here, and then I'm going to walk through the corner one more time. We're coming up to the next corner, so I'm going to do it again just to make sure. So I've gone through the hole, I've gone back through under the lace. So we've done it once, so we're going to go back through that hole again. And turn it over there, and that's twice. And it's also going to be where your hole is sitting at the corner when you're turning it as well. That's going to make a difference. These would be really cute with a leather piece on to make for little purses, eyeglass cases, phone holders, different things like that. So we've done that 3 times now. So then now we're going to come back over and do it 2 more times. And I got him twisted in this next hole. So straighten it out, and I gotta start adding again here. So we're gonna start adding our next suede piece right here. So over And under that one, that last one that we did, and over, and then back under that last one that we did. So you should still have all of your braids. There's also some great videos online in Tandy Leather. Just look up the double loop lacing. And we're back to doing our stitch. So I'm going to go grab another piece here. I'll probably need 2 more added on as I'm going. And I'm just going to continue to work all the way till I get back to the beginning. I've gone all the way around, and on this corner, because this was thinner, I did 2 here, 2 here, and 2 here. And I really like that corner a lot better. But again, it's going to depend on the size of lacing you're using, and you just need to kind of learn to adjust. So I've come all the way back to here, and I've gone through the loop and back behind it. So now we would be going back behind this loop. But what I did is this lacing right here, I pulled this out. So I just pulled that first lacing out to kind of make a loop, just enough that I can make a loop. And we're going to go through it, and then we're going to come through the front, and we're going to pull that nice and tight. And then we're going to come through this again. We kind of want to walk that a little bit. And we're going to come through that loop again. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my needle and I'm going to go up as far as I can and come out on the side. Is my case, it's going to be out on the corner. And I want to kind of pull that so it's kind of distributing kind of evenly. And then just adjust that. Trim that wherever you need to trim that. And that is how you finish your edge. Now it's done exactly the same on the board. You should see each of these should be nice and even as you're going along, and you can see these were a little bit thicker, so they kind of covered up the rim color. But depending on what color you're doing it underneath or what color this is, you may want to color your rim that same so it doesn't show up. There it's nice and thick, and you can just see the black there. I haven't done the inside of that yet, but this is our back side. And like I had stated earlier, I should have really gone in and just painted that black before I put my lacing in. It took me almost as much lacing to do this as it did the rim, because you think about it, it's just a round circle. So that is something else to think about as well. But my thought and theory to this is don't make it more complicated than it is. And I really think that the thicker it is, the nicer it lays. So you may want to pick a thicker one instead of a thinner one like I used there. But anything that you have or you want to use up is good as well. So let's get ready, and we're going to show you how to make our leather feathers, and then we will be done. To work on our feather, I'm going to talk to you about where I get my leather or suede, and you can use either one, and it comes in different thicknesses. But I look at my local thrift store. A lot of people will buy leather and use part of it, not all of it. You find it there quite a bit. Another thing you can also do is look in the clothing. A lot of times it is pieces of clothing and it's outdated, so that you can get it at a real reasonable price. I was blessed enough to find basically 3 different pieces that were real similar to the color of the cording that I was working with. So look for that as well. And like I said, it comes in different thicknesses. This is leather, but this is really, really soft. So there's different types of leather. Now, it also depends on what side you want to use. This side looks more like a suede than a leather. And I'm going to do my feather the same way that I did my
feather on the part that I made. So I'm going to just draw my line down the middle, and I'm not making these as big for this little piece because I'd only want a little feather here. So again, make them as big or as little as you want to. And I'm just doing that real basic shape, and I'm putting it on the side where I could remove it, but I'm actually going to use the suede side because that's what shows up or matches my lacing better. And these are just snips. We do have these at miriamjoy.com. They're really great to cut out leather with. So if you want a pair of those, I really, really like them to cut my heavier items with. And my husband says they'll last forever. So on this one, I wanted to have the white on it, just not have it just look black because my feather is white with black. So I just took the basic line, and I'm going to use a multi-surface paint. This is just acrylic paint, but it's multi-surface. So that is the reason that I'm doing that. And I'm just going to take a little liner brush. It doesn't have to be just something that you can get small lines on with. And again, I'm using the soft side. And if you were using the other side, it probably wouldn't absorb in as much, and you could use a little bit of water if you wanted to, but this one absorbs in a lot, so I'm not going to hardly water it down at all. And I want to start at that middle and kind of wisp it out at the ends to give it that real feathery feel. And I'm going to walk it down one side and then come right back up to the top and just walk it down the other side. Don't make it hard. It is very simple. Don't try to make it complicated. So I'm going to finish this side, and then we'll finish up the other side. So I've gone down, and we're just going to finish this off by making sure our ends are real wispy there. And let that dry. And once that gets dry, I'm going to use whatever cording was opposite of my leaf feather, sorry. And I want a little bit so that I can tie it onto the gourd. And I'm going to use tacky glue. And I am going to put a piece of tacky glue. Don't do your E6000. It doesn't do good with like material and things that are absorbent. It does good with things that are solid. So, and I want to put just on one side of my cording, however long my leaf is, my feather, boy, to glue that right on. Make sure you get enough glue on there. And this is stiff enough. I could just hold that, but I don't want so much that comes out on the sides. A little bit will. Okay. And then we're just going to simply do it glue it on from tip to tip and let that dry. And then once it's dry, we're going to come in and we're just going to cut our fringes. And how thin or thick you want to do them depends to you. Now I kind of started them in angles, so what I'm going to do right here is I'm going to cut this little piece of pie out. You don't want these too big, but you want to add movements to your feather. And see, by putting that cording in there, that also helps me from being able to cut that all the way across. I'm going to do another little slice of pie there. And you can see that is not much at all. It's very thin.
So don't take a lot of that out, just a little bit. And then I'm going to go ahead and finish this all the way up. And then on the other side as well, I think I'm going to probably do one more slice when we get to the top here, right about there. And you can see my angle. I'm going to put a little bit more of an angle. Just want to show you how I do the top before I get to there. And I'm going to quit right there. So I'm going to come back and do this other side now. On this piece, I'm going to hang my feather off of here, so I'm just going to put it through one of the lacings, and then I'm going to tie it just in one knot, just a single knot here, so it hangs off and down, just a simple knot. And then just run it up underneath your lacings and come out and cut it off. And we'll talk about it just on the gourd just a little bit here. And trim it. So if I was doing it on my gourd here, I would just take it up to this one here, tie it in one knot just to secure it, and then just run it right under the lacings right there till you come out and cut it off. And that is really all you did. These three I just tied together and ran it underneath. So it's really simple to put those on, and I actually like the color. I think a brown would have been kind of cool with those to kind of give that a little bit of a different look as well. Another thing I did to kind of get them to curl up a little bit is I came in with my wax tool or embossing tool, and I kind of ran that down some of those individual featherlets, is I guess what I was calling them. I know that's not correct. And see how that kind of makes some of them stand up so it's not all flat and you don't get a flat feather. So that gives it more movement in the feather itself. It's just real subtle on that other side, but this side was a little bit thinner, so it moved a little bit more, but that kind of gives it a little bit more of a different feeling there. So that is the end of our gourd.
Well, that was a lot of fun. I hope you learned a lot. If you ever have any questions, email me at art@miriamjoy.com. Please come on over to our page there for any of the products we may have introduced you to. Don't forget that the wax cord comes from bluewhalearts.com. And thank you so much for your support. God bless.